What's going on, Junkie Nation? Gorgeous George and Goes are back with another superstar from the sport of mixed martial arts. Today we get to talk to the UFC play-by-play commentator, Jon Anik, good friend of the show. What's up, John? How are you?
Oh, it's great to be with you. You see, Goes and I color coordinated, so we're already off on the proverbial right foot, but it's always good to catch up with you boys, especially in advance of a fight card that is probably as good as any we can put on paper at least. So it's always good to see your faces, fellas.
Stacked, isn't it? UFC 280? Holy cow.
I mean, you got all these main events sort of rolled up into a fight card. And I think for those people who would like to see us maybe do 32 shows instead of 42 shows a year, if we shave 10 off, a lot more cards would look like this. But I'm not complaining about the work and excited to get to Abu Dhabi, where a lot of us have been several times. This will be the shortest trip for us. I think a lot of us who were there on Fight Island, we were there in quarantine. This is like in and out. I'm leaving Tuesday. I might as well be going to Brazil. So we're ready to go, boys.
We've talked to you about a couple dozen times, and so I want to mix in a few questions that come from the fan side as well. So let's just start off with this. Oftentimes when we talk to fighters, we say, hey man, what's your routine like, to deal with the jet lag and the time difference and all that? And of course, I think what we've come down to with the athletes is one day per however many time zones they're moving, right? Now, how about for you, John? I mean, you're doing a live event. A lot of people underrate what we do, whether it's live or whatever. You got to be on. And obviously, you want to be at your optimal. So what is it for the commentator, especially someone who kind of writes the book on these things?
Well, you can only control what you can control. So there are going to be times where you try to get ahead of the jet lag, whether it's with exercise or with preparation, leaning into the sleep, even if you have to take a nap and that's not your traditional habit. But sometimes it'll just mess with you. Crossing a bunch of time zones is just not good for the human body. And I probably have more experience doing that than most, having gone to Brazil 27 times and going Miami to Vegas essentially every other week for the last 2 years. So I try to obviously get a sweat. I try to prioritize sleep. I try to get ahead of the preparation. I try to nutritionally maybe eat a little bit better than I would be eating when I'm at home. But it kind of is what it is. Mentally, I think whether you're an athlete or you're a commentator or somebody who has to perform under whatever lights, you got to sort of deal with the circumstances. Rarely, if ever, are you going to be 100% as an athlete. I guess we're probably closer to 100%, but I can sit here 11 years in and tell you boys, we've never had a perfect show. That's the goal for UFC 280, and that's why I'm going to prioritize sleep once again. But it doesn't mean I'm going to get it. Like a lot of these people lean into sleep aids. I don't really like to take anything because I think it's going to mess with my mind. So, I just got to sort of bite the bullet if I can't get the shut-eye.
Define what would be the perfect show. I'm curious.
Well, I don't know that it's possible, honestly, over 8 hours. I mean, if you're really looking for a no-hitter, George, in terms of never flubbing, that's never going to happen. But no, I think a show where all the fighters and coaches or fans are happy after the fact, our bosses are happy after the fact, and, there haven't been myriad utterances that you would like to take back. But it sounds trite to say you're your own harshest critic, but certainly however many years in, I still cringe sometimes when I watch it back. So, I think a lot of those would make for a close to perfect show, but I feel pretty convicted in saying we will never have a no-hitter.
Hopefully we can trade in cringe for maybe just I get a giggle at myself or whatever, because from our end, we're seeing, a lot of greatness, man, especially the team of you, Rogan and DC. You guys have really dialed it in. But a shout out to the other guys, Bisping, Felder. I mean, if it's a pitching staff, you guys got one hell of a pitching staff, not just like an ace. You got a closer and everything. But all right, sticking with the baseball analogies, how close have you been to this no-no that we're kind of joking around about, where you maybe have had such a great broadcast and then at the end something bothered you, something you said or something that happened that we may have missed?
Well, I would say to you guys, right, you have to learn to tolerate the sound of your own voice and yourself, and you have to lean into constructively criticizing yourself and giving yourself feedback. Like, we are almost 400 episodes into our podcast, and Kenny Florian has probably never watched an episode back. So if my man Ken Flo's listening, right, obviously I feel it to be hugely beneficial to actually watch yourself back. But no, when Khabib Nurmagomedov and Conor McGregor fought, and then there was the ensuing brawl, I got a call from Daniel Cormier after the fight that essentially intimated that I had done Khabib dirty, or, oh, you and Dom did Khabib dirty when it came to the brawl. I didn't know what he was talking about at the time. And still to this day, I think it's probably a little bit murky. But that was something after the fact where I was like, whoa, I got to go listen to the tape. And perhaps, DC was upset with the fact that I sort of insinuated that I was expectant that the fight was not going to end when the fight ended and that there was going to be some aftermath. But that comes to mind at least. And I think there are just randomly times where you say things that you don't even necessarily recognize. I had one recently where I dropped the word testicles when I just was sort of passionate about a fence grab. And then obviously my family was like, dude, like, what are you doing? And I actually thought that saying testicles was like softening the word balls in the moment. Heretofore, you'll probably never hear me say either, but I thought there was a fence grab that sort of maybe needed a little bit more flamboyance on the broadcast, and probably would take that one back, George.
I'll have to go back and listen to it and see what DC's talking about. Now you got me curious. That was one of the sadder, events of a pay-per-view that could ever happen. But at the same time, on a fight night, geez, I can't say I wasn't into it. But let me pivot to something here, because I did want to ask you this at some point here, and it's would you say that the commentators, not nightmare, but the scenarios where there are stuff that involves the rules that can be consistent or inconsistent, or according to how some refs handle it, a kick to the testicles or an eye poke. That's one thing that I've wondered on your guys' end. Are you guys reaching out to commissions and saying, hey, help us a little? Sometimes it can be amateur hour for not just you guys, but I think all of us are tweeting thinking we know the rules, but we may not, necessarily, or we may have not brushed up on it enough. Do you ever feel that way, that it's kind of like all of us at the same time, the people that are tweeting, the people that are talking about it, the people that are handling, what should happen? I seen at Bellator the other day, one ref telling the doctor, what do you think? Well, it's up to you. You know what I'm talking about?
Oh, yeah. No, I think you set it up beautifully. I think every commission is different. And to whatever degree, I do think you have commissioners and commentators that like to puff out their chest, whether it's that they don't get a UFC or a mixed martial arts live event for a long time, so they, want to start pulling their testicles out, if you will, or a commentator who knows the rules to such an extent that they're excited for there to be something involving a rule so they can try to puff out their chest. We like to joke, hey, I wonder if my man Rob Monroe, the cut man, is actually rooting for a deep cut. But Ray Longo, who's been on my podcast every episode for 7 years, likes to say there's a little bit of a kangaroo court going on. And certainly when we are under the guise of the Nevada State Athletic Commission, that is when I am at my most confident as a commentator, because I know that commission intimately. I know that they employ the best. And I know that, even if I have a question mid-broadcast, I have a truck full of producers, a capable commission, and of course UFC fighters to my immediate right. But yes, in terms of the totality of all of us sort of learning on the fly and continuing to learn, as I sit here late 2022, I've never felt more confident about my handle of the rules and the scoring than I do right now. But there's certainly people out there whose opinion I solicit after every show, whether it's Sean Sheehan for scoring or somebody else for refereeing, like a Mark Goddard type. So, I am still learning as far as my evolution as a mixed martial arts commentator, to be sure. And you will never hear me puff out my chest, because there's a lot of ignorance out there. I'm just trying to minimize how much of it I have.
Nice shout out to Sean Sheehan. And let's not forget, in Vegas, you also have Hall of Famer Mark Ratner, not too far away. That's always a nice resource, isn't it?
Well, and part of the reason why I'm a little bit ornery when I see a fence grab is because he's my number one go-to, and he says, don't forget, Johnny, first warning comes in the back, right? Yeah. So first fence grab warning essentially is in the back.
Man, this is great stuff. And it's not just our sport, folks. I see it in the NFL as well. You'll see the guy will be under the hood for 2 minutes. He's discussed it with the other guys. All those people are full-time employees of the NFL. They know the rule book inside and out. And even then they'll say, okay, it's a hold, it's a this, it's a that. And then the guy upstairs who's an expert who also did it for 15 or 20 years, he says, well, that's not the way I would have done it. So it happens in all the sports.
And perhaps we're not all aligned on every individual fence grab. Like, I have since sort of talked to Randy Brown about it over social media, and it's a public conversation, and perhaps it was an overreaction by me. But I think a lot of us are sort of at odds with some of the things that are wrapped into our sport. in terms of fouls and some of the regulations and decisions in these big time moments, right? When one takedown potentially prevented by a fence grab could have changed the outcome of a fight. Now, Randy, my man Rude Boy, I'm not saying that that's the case in this instance, but, I don't know what the masses necessarily think should be done in a situation like that. I do know when I got off the air that night, a lot of people felt like the fence grab was pretty blatant. So,
at the end of the day, though, you do go to bed and lay your head down on the pillow at peace with the job that you do. And I hope you do.
Yes, no doubt about it. And I feel like I am a byproduct of my repetitions. I'm 44 years old right now, and I can look back and say, hey, I've got 20 years in the business. So, I guess I'm doing something right. But yeah, I've always tried to lean into the hard work. I have acknowledged in my 40s that, I have some orating ability to whatever degree. But yeah, we're satisfied. We're always trying to get better. I treat every fight night like a pay-per-view, though. And so do our analysts, right? 26, 28, 30 athletes, whatever it may be, the task is still the same. And, the devil that it is at times, it's the devil we know, and it's a labor of love. And as long as the fighters are happy and the coaches, to a little bit of a lesser degree than the fighters, are happy, largely they are who I care about. And their families, right? Because this is the soundtrack of their professional lives.
John, not only the repetitions, but your reputation as well should be something that should be lauded about what we were talking about, that, the peace and the calm that you do have once you're done. You've given them everything, man. Your passion, your heart, the preparation. I think every athlete should, hopefully is appreciative of that.
Well, and I think, thank you, and it means a lot coming from you guys, and certainly I'm trying to earn the respect of every single member of this roster. So when there is a situation like Francisco Trinaldo and Randy Brown, I've established enough goodwill with Randy that it's really not a big deal, right? And you can only sort of hope for that you call it down the middle. And I root for all of these men and women to some degree, right? Like, having now witnessed, as you guys have, Randy's whole UFC career, it's pretty exciting to see what's going on. So it's hard not to have a little bit of a rooting interest, but I got to call it like I see it.
John, athletes will tell us, hey, cutting that last pound's miserable. Cutting that last half pound can be 30 minutes. All right. How about as a commentator? What's the difference between 24 athletes who got to hear your call of a fight versus 30 athletes? So for those that are in public school, that's 12 fights or 15 fights. What's the difference, man? As they progress, does it get harder, or once you hit your stride, it don't matter? Could they give you 18 if they wanted to?
Well, I'll show up and do the work. Obviously, they have capped it, I think, at 15 or maybe even 16.
Yeah.
It's the same amount of live television, essentially, but I can't even profess to you guys enough how much more manageable a live event task it is for a play-by-play commentator when it's 24 athletes versus 30 athletes, right? Even if you're just devoting an hour to each athlete, that's 6 hours right there. You can accomplish a lot, and time is money. So yes, for me, I get anxiety when I look at UFC 280 in front of me, 9 prelims. We sit here 8 days out, and I'm knee deep in the preparation. I voiced most of the show today, at least in terms of the in-arena stuff that you will hear. We got a doozy in terms of the pronunciations for UFC 280. But yeah, my man, I think when I started, it was traditionally 9 or 10 fights, and now the norm is 14 or 15. It's a beast, man. Give me 11 or 12 in the wheelhouse every day of the week, Sean and Mick, if you happen to be watching.
And then they call you to the host desk after a pay-per-view, and I'm like, let this guy eat some Wheaties or something. And honestly, you're keeping it cool. You're sitting there, you're addressing everyone by their name and giving it your all, like you always do. You always give it your all. You're never half-assing it. But tell me, in your mind, you got to be thinking about waffles and chicken or the pasta you're gonna smash. Or
oh yeah,
that's a
no, and I
give you. And this is after the weigh-ins. You do the whole weigh-ins. Sometimes you sub in for Joe. Holy cow.
Well, hey, I appreciate you laying it out for your wide audience. And certainly I think that my producers and my bosses are appreciative of the grind and everything that is asked of me to execute on a show-by-show basis. But, I do think that you sort of become conditioned to whatever your reality is, and that is my reality. Whether it's, living in the dry heat of Nevada, you become acclimated, or now, for me, living in the humidity of Florida, you adjust. The post-fight show, certainly when Chael Sonnen is up there, Chael's like a PED for me in terms of his energy, so it's easy to elevate. But yeah, I guess for me, like, to be able to decompress and be in that analyst role and to go up and do the post-fight show, even when I'm toast, it's sort of enjoyable for me. But yeah, if you're asking, I'm thinking about fried food and chicken and waffles and cheeseburgers and everything else. And you can be sure
to unload the luggage as well after he flew the plane.
Yeah, you can be sure that within 45 minutes of getting off the air, I'm probably 4 or 5 pounds heavier. So,
John, I too am 44 years old, so hopefully you're going to relate to what I'm about to talk about. In your job, do you ever feel any pressure to relate to this new audience that has grown up, right? A lot of our jokes and our examples don't make much sense anymore, right? Somebody's lip syncing, who's Milli Vanilli? That they're going to sit there and say, do you ever feel any pressure to kind of relate to this new audience?
You continue to lead the league in thoughtful questions, and obviously as the father of 2 girls and a boy, but my daughters are 11 and 9, and they don't have social media, they don't have TikTok, neither does their father. Certainly I have been compelled by many people, including people who represent me, to get into the TikTok game, just as an example in this conversation, and I have been very reluctant to do that. Dominic Cruz tried to get me on Snapchat for years, and as yet I have still resisted that temptation. And it's actually not even a temptation. I've never really worried too much about that. Candidly, for me, I've never been great when it comes to pop cultural references. When we show the celebrities on pay-per-view, that is probably the height of my anxiety. I'm much more comfortable when we show fighters or we are calling the action. All of a sudden, you start to show movie stars. I don't know who any of these people are. So I feel like I'm relatable to whatever degree. I feel like wearing a baseball cap and a T-shirt, I've always sort of tried to think of myself as a kid and still call people kid and still fancy myself as such. But not until getting asked this question do I feel even a modicum of pressure goes to relate to the younger generation. But if you need me to start cussing or take my shirt off, I could probably do any of those things.
All right, let me ask you this. Have you practiced your finishing call for your first slap knockout?
I love slap fighting championships. I am so compelled by it. It's almost like professional wrestling. I'm not a professional wrestling fan. I would be ill-equipped to be a WWE commentator, but if I'm flipping through the channels, however rarely that happens, I can't stop watching professional wrestling. Slap fighting is like that times 10. I can't get enough of this stuff. But no, nobody's calling my number for that just yet. But certainly, I hope before my career is said and done, to call an NFL football game and to call a slap fight. I think it's absolutely awesome.
John, I want to pick your brain on something. Jimmy Smith, who's working with WWE, is no longer working with WWE. The differences between calling sports and like sports entertainment, WWE, it seems like you can be very talented and sometimes it just doesn't matter, right? Like, look at Mauro Ranallo, right? His voice is attached to some of the most iconic moments in all of sports, but it just didn't work out over there at WWE. It didn't work out for Jimmy Smith, and he's uber talented. What is this pressure that comes with doing things outside? Like, why has it been kind of difficult for people who do sports to transition into calling pro wrestling?
Well, I think part of it is just that people have their choices and their vision and their people, and I think perhaps that was part of what led to Jimmy Smith's sort of unceremonious dismissal by the WWE. I certainly don't know a whole lot about it, but sometimes you can just be a victim of circumstance. I happen to have a very demanding boss in UFC President Dana White, and I do believe that I respond to his type of leadership, and I am trying to run through a brick wall for the guy. I am trying to earn that seat every show. But I am not blind to the fact that if I have a string of bad shows, as I've said to you guys before, that I could find myself looking for work. There are sports that I am not equipped to call. We've talked in the past about hockey. I don't have any historical framework for that sport, nor have I ever played it. I don't even necessarily know the terminology, but I feel like I could take a couple bong hits and drink 6 beers and go call a football game because that's the sport that I am probably most passionate about other than mixed martial arts. But I don't have a great thoughtful answer to you as to why it's been hard for other guys to maybe make the transition. For me, I came as sort of a mainstream sports guy trying to make the transition to combat sports. And while I have confidence in my ability to go back and do football, I understand that having not called a major football game since 2015, that I'd probably be up against it a little bit. But I don't know, man. I do think that even if you get good direction and even if you execute a vision, sometimes you can just be a victim of circumstance. And it sounds like for Jimmy, that was a big part of it.
You log a lot of miles flying throughout the world. Who needs a right to write a book that hasn't written a book yet?
Gosh, well, Dominic Cruz, to be sure. I know he's waiting to do that. Daniel Cormier is pretty selective. I mean, we see him as somebody who is saturated, and I say that in the fondest of terms. But Daniel Cormier has turned down a lot of acting work. I mean, he could certainly write a book and have already had a sequel published, So my first instinct is my broadcast partners. Kenny Florian might have had a book back in the day, but he fell off a cliff and nearly lost his life. And so that, to me, if that's the Kenny Florian autobiography, like that's the lead. Literally, I have seen people recently who watched him fall and thought he fell to his death. So, yeah, I'm glad Ratner got the book out of the way. Brian Stan obviously needs to update his, and maybe you guys. My grandfather said to me before he passed that if I just got on my computer and wrote 2 to 3 sentences about my everyday, this was when I was on the radio in Boston, I think in 2003, that in 10 years I'd have a memoir. And imagine if I had been doing that for the last 20 years. But needless to say, I actually do have a document that I started. It's about 1,000 pages, but I don't see a book in my future, guys.
It's funny you bring that up. Somebody brought that up to us years ago, and George kind of put things in perspective. And he said, well, I just don't feel like the ride is over yet, so why would I write it? And that kind of resonated with us. But I get why you're asking. You're having trouble falling asleep and you want a book to fall asleep to.
No, well, again, it's like, is my goal to have people buy the book, or is the goal the content, right? And I could say the same about my podcast. If you go, and again, if this sounds like a gratuitous plug for my podcast, so be it. But we've never been outwardly concerned with ratings. If you go to our YouTube channel, we don't have a lot of subscribers, nor do we have a lot of ratings. I'm focused on the content, perhaps to the show's detriment, but eventually we'll get there.
Anik and Florian podcast dropping on Mondays with the Longo Minute. Yes. So he's been on every single one, huh? Or close to?
So I think we've done 368 shows. He's done 364. So yeah.
Oh, all right, that's pretty cool. All right, so 280, Oliveira versus Makhachev for the vacant title. Well, it's sad that it's that way, because think about it. Oliveira could really, should he win, he should be looking at 2 additional title defenses. And when we talk about GOATs and, the greatest of a certain division or whatever, we have these arguments. Boy, those title defenses, that's what the hardcores seem to lean into, But what a tragedy that it's not that. Now, Chucky Olives doesn't seem too bothered by it. He is still getting his pay-per-views. But talk about this fight, man. This is really, really, I think, define Makhachev for sure, because he hasn't fought anyone as high as Oliveira, like a number 3 or anything like that. And then for Olives, he will have pretty much addressed every single style out there, I think, that can come at him.
Yeah, again, I think you set it up well. I mean, title defenses are championship banners in a lot of respects. That's why at times Israel Adesanya has taken issue with me and others who have suggested that when he beat Kelvin Gastelum in maybe the greatest fight that I've ever called, or at least the most exciting, given the back and forth nature of it, how is he not defending a belt in his next time out against Robert Whittaker? So he wants credit for that as a title defense. But you're right. I mean, that is sort of the number one criteria, right? And that's why John Jones could have 15 championship banners hanging in Albuquerque, New Mexico. I have been looking at different ways in terms of the phraseology to work around this vacant lightweight title, because I don't necessarily see it as vacant. And I think Charles has the right approach. I think most of us, boots on the ground, are going to acknowledge him as the champion. I mean, he is certainly getting that red corner. And I think history-wise, it's a little bit disappointing that this isn't a continuation of what he was able to do his last time out. But the magnitude of this fight is just absurd. I mean, it's just the perfect fight. It really seems like the perfect fight. And that's why, even if I wasn't calling the fight, guys, I wouldn't get too predictive with my analysis, because I can certainly see it going both ways. Now, most of my contemporaries, if I can call the pro fighters and my co-workers contemporaries, seem to like Islam and believe that he deserves the distinction as the favorite. But won't find me fading Charles Oliveira. I don't know why anybody would want to walk to a window and bet against that man right now against any other lightweight in the world. It's a fascinating fight. I don't expect it to go the distance. And, I think MMA fans around the world are just going to be the better for it. I think they could fight twice with respect to Volkanovski and Dariush and everybody else, Gamrot. But, it's a fascinating fight. I can't wait. I get anxious talking to you guys about it. So,
would it be almost fair to say that Oliveira is maybe the most exciting fighter for you to call?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, absolutely. I mean, certainly would be a guy that would be in that conversation. I think I referred to somebody else as that guy recently. But yeah, Charles obviously is cut from that cloth. And again, it's hard to imagine or think of a fight that he's been involved in that has not been entertaining. And the lightweight division has a lot of those guys. Yeah. Really does. If you look at the top 10, I think more than any other division in terms of entertainment value, lightweight's got it going on.
Aljamain Sterling versus TJ Dillashaw. That's the co-main event. It's for the UFC bantamweight title. Aljamain Sterling defending. TJ Dillashaw, the former champ. He is the challenger. How crazy is this, man? I mean, both guys have stacked resumes, and now they're chirping, or they have been chirping. So does that actually add something a little extra when they are chirping for you, John? Like, personally and professionally?
Oh, I love it. I love the heat as a fan, as a commentator. And by the way, the man I recently called the most exciting in MMA, I think, was Brandon Royval, who, if I'm not mistaken, competes on October 15th. But yeah, this is as good as it gets, right? I mean, TJ Dillashaw brought a lot of what he's been through unto himself, but trying to become a 3-time UFC bantamweight champion, it doesn't seem to me like he has outwardly acknowledged the danger factor in this Aljamain Sterling fight. So I'm very curious to sit with TJ in Abu Dhabi behind closed doors and really hear where he's at in terms of what this Sterling challenge holds. Because as you guys know, Dominic Cruz is one of my best friends in the world. But objectively, when I look at the conversation for the greatest bantamweight of all time, who is it other than Dom, right? TJ, it's a little bit hard to quantify because of his suspension. But what about Aljamain Sterling? I mean, what about what this guy has accomplished? Now, out the other side of the Petr Yan rivalry, getting a chance to get a Dillashaw scalp on his resume. Aljamain Sterling has done a lot of things. This man has not lost a fight in a long time. I mean, the Corey Sandhagen win and the quick nature of it continues to age very gracefully. Aljamain Sterling is one of the best bantamweights of all time. He's strong as an oxen there at 135 pounds. I think you could argue he should be worth the minus 200 in this fight. TJ is one of my favorite guys ever. And love that fight between TJ and Dom in Boston in 2016. TJ is a legend. Still, for me, he is. And I'm excited for Aljo to have the chance to prove that he indeed is the goods. And as dangerous as most of us think Sterling is, chance to prove it against Dillashaw doesn't get better than that.
Yeah, man, this one's really going to define one or the other because, yes, that talk about who's the greatest, it's all of them have a strong argument. And sticking with that same division, Petr Yan, did I say that right? Petr Yan versus Sean O'Malley. Holy cow, like Sean O'Malley, he must have felt the heat. Hey, man, you're fighting for contracts or position or you always want to be in Vegas. Boom, Petr Yan in Abu Dhabi. Holy cow, did he just shove them all in or what?
Well, O'Malley didn't bat an eye, and I'm not sure he has all that much to lose. I mean, certainly he could go out and get stapled in 2 minutes, and there's going to be a lot of noise from a majority, but those aren't the people that matter. Those aren't the people that are going to define Sean O'Malley's career if there's a setback. But I look at this top 7, and I think you can argue this is a pretty good matchup for Sean, who is a willing grappler, but he's a striker, and so is Petr Yan. Jan's wrestling is outstanding. We'll see how Jan chooses to proceed. I could also argue that it's a bad time to be fighting Petr Yan, who in theory will be at the height of motivation. When Jan became the undisputed champion, there were talking heads like me suggesting that when he's on, he looks like he's going to go on to become the greatest bantamweight of all time, and then he couldn't get past that Sterling chapter. So how does he handle Sean O'Malley, who has 5 inches in length, a little bit less pronounced in terms of the leg reach, just 2 inches. I think it's a fascinating fight. I can understand why Sean Shelby was sort of convincing in getting Dana White on board with this fight, and it's a great fight, huge opportunity for O'Malley and Jan to prove that he deserves to be back in a championship setting.
So the card is stacked, folks. We could go on forever, but I want to be cognizant of the time. My man here, Jon Anik, that he gives us always here on MMA Junkie Radio. Just a couple final things. Beneil Dariush versus Matthias Gamrot. That's a great fight. So we can put that one to the side. We don't have time right now to address it. But what's the latest you've heard in terms of the Volkanovski and Dariush sweepstakes for who actually really steps in case one of the two isn't ready to fight for whatever reason?
All right, so I have heard nothing. So I have gotten all my fighter cards together, if you are watching as I get organized, and I did pull my Alexander Volkanovski notes just in case I have to prep him on Yaz Island. I have not gotten word yet. If I was just a curious guy and maybe a gossip monger who wanted to go tell my twin brother it was legitimate, maybe I would email my boss, Zach Candido, and softly say, hey, should I be prepping Volkanovski? At least right now, I haven't gotten word. I'm going to show up prepared, and maybe if 72 hours from now things expire and I want to get curious, maybe I will. And it's time to generate an Alexander Volkanovski fighter biography. But at this point in time, I have not gotten word, and I'm only preparing 28 athletes and not 29.
Yeah. Well, Dariush has won 7 straight. Man, the poor guy, I felt like he could have possibly been fighting for this vacant title. But he's taking on a tough customer, Matthias Gamrot. And then I hear Volkanovski. Like, on the one hand, I hear him. Like, this guy's chasing greatness. He put the featherweight division on check. And then he breaks his hand or a bone in his hand, recovers from it, and his thirst and his hunger to be one of the greats. Now he wants to be a champ. He's flying out there. He's kind of calling the shots. Like, I respect that too. I don't know where I sit on this, but I guess because I'm a SoCaler, LA in the house, that my heart's a little bit on the Dariush side with this one.
Well, and I think in a meritocracy, Beneil Dariush would be the guy, but then you lose that fight potentially with Mateusz Gamrot. And candidly, I don't expect there to be any issue when it comes to Charles Oliveira and Islam Makhachev. But when we talk about the bantamweight GOAT, and again, if people don't want to have this conversation, that is fine, but that's a shorter conversation than the featherweight GOAT, which is this three-headed monster of Jose Aldo, Max Holloway, and Alexander Volkanovski. And I could write a 40-page thesis statement on all three, shouting out their merits as to why they should be the guy. Max Holloway is actually the guy for me as I sit here right now, late 2022. So I can understand why Volkanovski wants to sort of separate from that pack and potentially chase a belt. Obviously, he's won like 20 consecutive fights and has put himself in a position where he's hard to deny that opportunity to become a double champion in an era where a lot of people have been afforded that opportunity. But doing it in a backup situation is unique. Coming off an injury, I don't know. I don't know that I think it's the perfect alignment for Volkanovski, but I do think eventually he's going to get his opportunity to chase lightweight greatness. The other thing, too, is that you have Yair Rodriguez and Josh Emmett lurking, not to mention Arnold Allen, who has accepted a fight against Calvin Kattar. So the cupboard at 45 is not bare, but I do think eventually Volkanovski's going to move up and see if he can, check that box.
You're the man, Jon Anik. Thank you so much for chilling with us for over a half hour here on Junkie Radio. Probably could ask you 100 other questions, but again, I know it's busy. You got the family, you got the prep, you got a huge trip coming up, and an awesome show to call on October 22nd out in Abu Dhabi. 2 title fights, and all these fights that could legitimately be main events for fight nights. So lucky, to have this time with you again. Thank you, and we'll talk to you soon.
Always enjoy chopping it up with you guys. Somebody needs to tell Bilal Muhammad he's on the prelims. I'm not going to tell him, but somebody needs to tell him. So.
Oh, by the way, Royval is not fighting tomorrow. It looks like Askarov missed weight, and they couldn't agree on a catch weight. So only bring it up just because you happen to bring up his
wow.
Yeah.
Well, and there are a lot of fighters who try to get ahead of it. I don't know exactly what transpired this morning, but they'll say, just so you know, like if my dude at flyweight especially misses weight, right? Matt Schnell, Alex Perez comes to mind. Like, I'm not fighting the guy. So I'll be interested to hop on Junkie after we dismiss and see what's going on.
There you go. All right. We're out of here. Thanks, Jon. See you.
Thank you, boys.